And I think we're live. I'm looking at the dot there. I think we're live. Okay, yes. Richard Grove, forensic historian, and the famous podcaster of Grand Theft World podcast. I mean, I call you famous because for my subscribers, you are very famous. I knew about you before you asked me to be on your show, which thank you for inviting me to be on your show. It's definitely a deeper dive than I'm giving my audience on a regular basis. So go subscribe to Richard Grove's Grand Theft World podcast and get some real history lessons. He's got an amazing background we're going to talk about in a second, all the way back to 9/11 and being a whistleblower and all kinds of crazy stuff. But Richard, before we get into that, I want to go right to this Russell Brand controversy, because the latest now is they're going after Rumble, because just taking everybody back, there are these anonymous accusations to Russell Brand of sexual assault. He has denied them. YouTube then demonetizes his channel, though I believe they're probably still making money off of him because they're getting subscription revenue and whatnot. They're just not letting him have the money, which I think is interesting. Love to hear your thoughts on that. But now it's moved to the fact that he's tied to Rumble. And Dan Bongino has recently said, go follow him on Rumble. He can make his living on Rumble. And now it's well, what's Rumble? The video sharing platform immune to cancel culture? Because this is where it all goes. So now it's all right, so now we're going to go find all the extremists on Rumble because it's this basically criminal infested podcasting streaming platform, and now we're all going to be under the spotlight. And this is typically, for me, this is typically how I see the trend. It's okay, we find this individual, we're going to attack. And, I honestly have no idea what's really going on behind the scenes here. I'll just say that up front. I don't know what happened with Russell Brand. I don't know who these people are that are making the accusations. I don't know if they're even real. I don't know if it's true or not. And I don't even really have an opinion on Russell Brand himself, honestly. I've seen some of his videos I think are spot on. I actually did a video where I thought he did something got something wrong. I'm just not a groupie, so I don't, I'm not bought in one way or the other, but I will say this. I am catching on to this trend, which is you pick the person who's going to be under the thumb of whatever the particular controversy is that we have to and then we expand it to everybody else who could possibly be tied to this and what the big meaning is, and then how these people are getting away with it. And so it's it just seems to follow this trend all the time. You pick the person, it's the individual, and then the media has to go over expand it to well, how does this guy get away with this? And then it's well, we found out it's these crazy podcasting platforms. And of course, it's going to be tied to Trump and everything else that the media hates. And now it's oh, great. Those of us who are on Rumble are now going to be tied into it too. So I don't know, Richard, opening thoughts. What do you think about all this?
Well, Rumble's a great place. Grand Theft World's over there. And for them to come out with this timing. So it's a coordinated attack, and it had a very specific timing. And I looked at the calendar to see what else was going on. Oh, it's consequential. It's simultaneous, parallel to the new vaccine launch. And who was one of the most outspoken YouTube-friendly vaccine critics? He didn't lose his channel because he spoke about it in the way that was palatable for the terms and conditions. So he's been a thorn in their side, and he was using their rules against him to communicate with a very large audience, which he also kind of duplicated over on Rumble. So he's got YouTube and Rumble. And so he's going through and he's poking the bear, going on Bill Maher, poking the bear. He made his whole recent career during COVID and after poking the bear. His prior career was a movie kind of comedian type character who was married to Katy Perry and had drug addiction and questionable sexual relationships, which he was open and wrote about back in the day, right? So here's this character that I don't really relate to him, but I do find him to be an intelligent human being who occasionally says things that are spot on and usually says things that are interesting. And because of that, he has a large audience. And the Pfizers of the world, the Modernas of the world, they don't know how to get an audience like that for themselves. So they're jealous, and they have a product that's going to come out, and he's about to tear it down. And they've been clearing the field, starting with Alex Jones, moving up to Tucker Carlson. Now they want to clear Russell Brand, and they know they can accuse him of a couple different things that it will make him persona non grata. They will Kanye him. Right? They'll do something that's everybody just cancels him at the same time. Same thing with Alex Jones. Everybody, Spotify, Apple, all these companies, Facebook, all in unison, all in coordination, as if it was a conspiracy to deny somebody their free speech rights or their rights to do XYZ in the free market. So this is a pattern that's been repeating. And then you can look at it in different cases. If you look at it in the case of Russell Brand, The timing is coincidental to this vaccine launch, and the fact that it's a vaccine for children, and children during COVID, like dozens of children died from COVID. I looked it up on the CDC. I posted it on my Twitter. It was dozens. So dozens doesn't justify 20 million doses and $12 billion of the government spending money with these pharma companies to give them a vaccine for something they don't really need, according to their own data. So there's that would have been called out this month. So they don't want to interrupt their launch, because without their launch, they can't mask people next month and have another lockdown over Christmas or whatever they're planning. He's very inconvenient. He's a pebble in the shoe of, of these elites, these non-elected rulers. And the takedown is, it's specious, because you're never going to hear from these women directly. You're only going to hear what the journalists allow you to hear about this. And they apparently have been cooking this up over a long period of time, calling hundreds of people. So these weren't people that came forward and made these accusations necessarily. These were journalists who were calling back, doing opposition research for political purposes. And those purposes, it was war is politics by another means, and politics is war by another means. These type of von Clausewitz observations back in the day, or maybe it was Machiavelli. But no matter what, like, these are not because Russell Brand took certain actions and justice is prevailing. The same people persecuting him are the same ones that, won't tell us where Epstein's client list is. And they're the ones who cover for the Epstein crowd, right? So there's becoming a forthright opposition, whether it's the World Economic Forum formalized corporate group, or just these other people who have a lot of influence over the deep state that are now saying, let's take this guy to task. Let's set an example with him, just like they're doing with the J6 people who are being politically prisonered in our country, right? As compares to a Ray Epps, who gets like a slap on the wrist misdemeanor or something like that. So there's a very unequal scale of justice dynamic going on here. And for him to be considered guilty, to lose all these various contracts and get canceled without a shred of evidence being brought forth other than a journalistic claim that hasn't been investigated yet. So he's innocent until proven guilty. That's not because of some recent law. That's because that's how logic works. You can't assume guilt. Like, ignorance is making a decision before you examine the evidence. So what we see out there is a mass demonstration of ignorance. And he made it through the Me Too era without these things coming up, but then all of a sudden they have this thing that's coordinated, and there's more to follow. I'm sure there's like a documentary hit piece type thing that they'll do on them. But that's the analysis at this time. Logical people, we know there's not enough information to make a judgment, so we're not going to waste a lot of time on it. Other people who want to say he's guilty or he's innocent, like, you don't know yet. We don't have enough data yet. So I'm going to put it aside, wait till it's a little bit more history and less current events. Other people will spin their wheels, waste their time, argue about these things, but it'll flesh out in the coming weeks, months, with evidence or no evidence.
I saw this woman who is like a self-described feminist researcher or something on Twitter sharing a video with a woman saying that Russell Brand has been curating an anti-establishment or anti-media audience purposely for this moment. And of course he knew this was coming. That's why he got all these people who don't trust the media. That way he can say, see what they're doing to me. And it totally invalidates the real reasons that people found Russell Brand, whether you like him or don't. A lot of the stuff that he was saying was true about, like, the COVID narrative, like you just brought up. And people found one of the voices. Somehow he was able to survive through all that. That's the other weird thing. I always wonder too about, like, how Russell Brand was able to survive through all that on YouTube. Like, they didn't demonetize him, and now all of a sudden they're demonetizing him for this. Like, who called that one in? Like, I don't really quite understand that. But that said, it totally invalidates the real reasons that people don't trust the media, or the real reasons that people don't trust big pharma or the government. Because now they're all just hoodwinked people by this guy, Russell Brand, who was planning this the whole time to protect himself. In the same way, when they're writing about who appears on Rumble, this is after they basically talk about how Donald Trump's tied to it, Alex Jones tied to it. And then they just say it's most popular accounts on the platform are run by individuals, not organizations. A quarter of those creators have been banned or demonetized on other social media sites, according to analysis by Pew of 200 highly followed accounts. As of June 2022, about 80% of accounts were individuals, while 20% were organizations. I don't even know why that's even important to them, other than it's just this free for all these crazy people, apparently. But in this way that they're writing about it, they do the same thing as that woman I was just talking about, which is they're saying essentially that because they don't ask the question about why any of us were demonetized or why any of us have been censored on YouTube. They just say like we're felons or something. You know what I mean? Like we've gone through some kind of judicial process and we've been found to be, criminals that just had to go to this island somewhere where we could have, some kind of rights post prison. They don't say anything about how ridiculously rigged this whole system is, that we have to go to Rumble, and find a home somewhere because YouTube has these completely arbitrary guidelines about truth. And it doesn't really have anything to do with truth at all. So I just thought that was interesting too.
Well, first off, there's like these weak claims that Russell went out and did all this work to cover up this thing. Let's break that apart. That's an interesting claim. I'm interested in the step-by-step. How did they come to that conclusion? Because what he does is, whether you like him or not, it's a lot of hard work. There's a lot of cerebral intellectualness that has to come through that whole portal. If he did these things, it'd be easy for him to just keep his head low and not have any YouTube presence and not piss off the overlords, the non-elected rulers who would put out hits. And actually, you were right. Somebody phoned it in. Somebody finally, in a position of lobbying power, made a call for their benefactors that said, you got to do something about this guy. And I'm willing to bet, Pfizer's got the most money on the line this month, right? In this milieu of people, it's not Fauci, it's not EcoHealth. I'm thinking about what he's talked about. It's not Klaus Schwab this month, right? The other hot topics and positions in power that he spoke in truth to that would want him out. I didn't see any of their agendas lining up as the pharmaceutical launch of this major product for this critical season.
Well, and say, Richard, I were to go down your theory here. I'm just thinking that if they had demonetized him over COVID, which I know they did rip one video down of his at some point over ivermectin, but say that they demonetized him over his COVID content, I bet they know that would be that would just be, that would cause a huge mob, right? Of people who are
blatant.
It would be too blatant. I know. And so, like I said, I don't know how intentional this is. I always wonder behind the scenes because me as a reporter, I never was none of this stuff was shown to me. So I didn't have anybody saying, Allison, here's what we're going to do to this person. All right. And this is our purpose behind it. I just saw headlines and we were just repeating them. That's how a lot of this stuff works. They're just parroting who? I don't even know. I don't know who we're parroting. But just like I said, if I were to go down your road and take that theory seriously, then yeah, that would make sense in that you couldn't take the guy down over COVID because, yeah, you're right. That would be just too obvious. It would create more distrust. And what they're trying to do is groom people back into submission.
Similar to what they did with Alex Jones. They could have come after him 2014, 2015, 2016, 2017. They stacked it up so that they understood that he helped to get Trump elected. And I don't play red team, blue team. So I just look at that as an objective observer of how upset they were at the Google meeting the week after Trump got elected. And they're like, never again. And then as part of that, those same tech overlord censors take off Alex Jones out of the playing field. And there was the great censoring and purging of all those truth platforms that we were just talking about. YouTube used to have actual truth on there, and you'd have dissenting views and contradictory views, and you'd have to learn to think through, and they wanted to sanitize that and make it all safe for people, because taking away our critical thinking faculties left us open to this vacuum of centralized power to tell us what is safe to think. This is misinformation, malinformation, disinformation. Oh, here's the safe narrative for you. And if you leave it, you'll be persecuted, debanked, et cetera, et cetera. And they've set that precedent over the past couple of years. And so I think it's a top-down international precedent, and it's not a grassroots, we're doing this because this makes sense type of precedent.
Mm-hmm. Okay, Richard, let's talk about wine for a second before we get into your background, which is fascinating. Grab a glass, blah, blah, blah. See, I've already had too much wine already. No, actually, I probably should have a glass. I haven't had any at all. I just naturally have the wino flubs on my channel I'm watching my 3-year-old right now dragging our large dog around the yard. I feel bad for that dog, even though she weighs 60 pounds. Obviously, she doesn't understand she can drag her 3-year-old around. Anyway, okay, so I was know this Cody Swiss. Of course, YouTube is going to keep profiting off of other people's labor and content. I'm looking forward to a class action against YouTube. We'll see if that ever happens. Okay, everybody, don't forget AllisonWinePromo.com, AllisonWinePromo.com. It's a great way to just support the channel, have a great glass of wine, and you're going to be listening to Richard talk about all kinds of crazy stuff. So if you're not drinking tea like I am, then the next best option is probably my high altitude Malbec. It's extremist altitude Malbec, one from almost 9,000 feet. It's the way to be an extremism expert or an extremist without going to federal prison so far. I can't tell you for sure that the federal government will come after you at some point in the future, but so far, none of the AllisonWinePromo.com consumers have gone to federal prison. If you have, please let me know. I will definitely have you on the channel. So the best wines out there, and for a great cause. Keep people like Richard coming on, and also, like I said, you get 50% off the wine and 50% off shipping. So it's a great deal on some great wines. Also, new sponsor is fieldofgreens.com. So if you go to fieldofgreens.com, I pull them up here. You can get some superfood powder. It's organic. These are whole fruits and vegetables that are ground up after they're flash frozen, and it's a great way to get your full serving of fruits and vegetables. Your garden's not up and running because it's growing into winter, or because you live in Florida and can't figure out how to grow anything without either your animals or somebody else's animals or God's animals eating everything, or just the soil being terrible or whatever. Like I'm in the jungle now. I'm trying to make it work, you guys. I really am. But anyway, if you go to fieldofgreens.com and use promo code Allison, that's with 1 L, you get 15% off the first order. Again, organic superfood powders. I take 2 scoops a day, put it in a glass of water, shake it up, drink it. It's great, tastes good, and it's a great way to get some nutrition. Like I said, if your garden's not up and running, you're not going to the farmer's market, whatever else. And if you're just on the run. If you have already bought at fieldofgreens.com, you can use Allison promo code for 15% off a subscription to the product. But I don't think it will work if you've already bought from them before for just a single purchase. So just a heads up on that. Okay. And then finally, over at AllisonMorrow.locals.com, this is where you can put your questions in ahead of time for interviews. $5 a month to go one-on-one with the most censored people on the internet, like Richard. We've got questions we're going to take from him in a second. So go check that out if you dare. All right, Richard, let's switch from Russell for a second, and let's go back in time a little bit for you, because you have a really interesting background, which you probably could do like an entire year's class on. So how do you sum it up when you tell people, like, you're at a cocktail party, they're like, Richard, what do you do? What's your elevator pitch?
The easiest way is we start at the ground. So I went to public school, and then I went to university for 5 years to get a degree. And on the way through university, I discovered I wasn't going to make very much money with my degree. And I had switched from engineering and pre-med type of courses into business because I thought that would be a place where you have upward mobility as an entrepreneur. Now, the accounting classes and logistics classes that college teaches you, I also realized, like, this isn't going to help. So the way I like to say it is, I was reading the school newspaper. And to be candid, I wasn't reading it for like the articles. I was reading it to look for bar specials. Who had the good bar special with the food tonight? I saw an ad in the paper, and it said, make $10,000 this summer. And I thought, I only make $3,000 a summer working as a fry cook, and that's hard work. So how do I make 3 times as much? So I went through a series of interviews, and I ended up investing and borrowing money to invest in a franchise where I learned how to run a business. And the business we did was house painting. So you learn how to hire and fire and get the jobs and do the bids and deliver the work and get good customer satisfaction. And by the end of college, I saw my friends like go on the job fairs and working on their resumes at Kinko's, and they were like waiting for an offer. And I knew with my skill set, I could write my own ticket. I could go get an offer wherever I wanted. So do I want to do sales? Because that was the most valuable skill set that I had learned there. Did I want to do sales in pharmaceutical, or did I want to do it in software? And I thought pharmaceutical, God, that could end up killing people. Those doctors sell drugs to people, and sometimes they don't work out, right? So software doesn't kill people, I naively thought. So for the next 5 or 6 years, I worked in the high-tech industry, and my clients were the world's biggest banks and defense contractors and insurance agencies and stuff like that. And long story short, one of my clients used to be in the World Trade Center, and it was a rather big client called Marsh & McLennan Companies. And we had a whole bunch of people that were there until July of 2001. And then I happened to be at that location that morning to witness some of the events. And then in a panic, after I saw the second tower blow up, I left. And then I started to have questions. And within the first couple months, I started to discover small little nuggets, nothing to change your life over, but just little, how did they do that, or what's going on with this? For instance, two of my clients, AIG and Marsh & McLennan, were involved with 9/11, and they owned a security company called Kroll Associates. Now, I did not know this at the time of servicing their accounts, but I found this out slowly afterwards as you start to ask the question, what happened? Who was I working for? What are these companies doing? How did they have the insider trading that was going on? How did they manage the security at the site? And these are the things that were going on. So there's a November 1st, 2001 New York Times article by Jim Dwyer, The Vault Below Ground Zero. And you come to find out there's a whole bunch of gold under World Trade Center 6 that is being in transit that morning. There's armored trucks that are partially full of gold. And Kroll Associates, they call it the CIA of Wall Street, Kroll Associates, but really it's the Mossad of Wall Street. If you look into its history and who controls it and who owns it and what it does. So it's a very interesting security company at the middle of 9/11. So I ended up working another 2 years in the corporate world before running into another issue, because 9/11 left me with more questions than answers. And I didn't know who to go to in authority that might not be involved. So I was just holding that while I was working the rest of my corporate career. I ended up becoming a whistleblower, a federal whistleblower in 2003 under the Sarbanes-Oxley Act. And the gist was I worked at a software company that sold a piece of software to Fortune. Any publicly traded company had to buy this sort of software, either from IBM or from us, right? And this would prevent their audit trails of accounting and these sort of things from getting deleted, as they had done in Enron and Anderson Consulting and Tyco International and these types of events, right? So I'm selling software that I naively thought this is helping make our markets secure, because, there was corruption and the Congress made this law and now people have to have this protection, and I'm selling this prophylactic. Well, I come to find out the software has a back door in it. So the prophylactic has a hole in it. And now I'm the guy that they have to use to get companies to buy into this and become vulnerable, which I didn't like that position. And there was a couple of credible instances early on. It started to tip me off to this. So because Tyco International was one of these biggest frauds ever in history, they were under SEC and FBI investigation and mandate that they couldn't delete their data and stuff like that. So I had a meeting with the senior legal counsel for the company, Global Tyco International. And she said in the meeting, she's like, I had just cooked the books for the Pharmacia, Pfizer, whatever that merger was. She was the general counsel for that. And so when she was explaining herself later, she was very candid. But it started off with, my pitch was, use our software, preserve all your email and all Outlook Exchange, all this stuff that you guys have to keep track of for these SEC and FBI investigations. And she said, I don't want to keep this data. I want to know how to delete it and make it look like it was never there. And I was like, what? Record scratch. And then my tech guy, I'd only worked at the company 2 weeks. So I'm like in a first kind of sale, probably my second or third sales meeting. And this is going on. So they're like, oh, we can help you out. We could talk about that offline. And she was being very candid, and I was being very shocked by what I was hearing. That was July. The next month, I was in Maryland at the National Association of Securities Dealers. The NASD is like a watchdog over the stock market. I'm trying to sell them the software that they need to be SEC compliant, right? And they tell me across the table, two of their guys, senior guys, your software has a back door in it, and it allows this, the jar file, the Java archive file, to be deleted during staging, and it looks like it was never there. So now I got this piece from Tyco International's general counsel who seemed to know a little bit too much about that specific specificity of the software. You know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
That's so then I started to raise concerns inside, and I was emailing and documenting and getting retaliation and escalation. And so finally I called the SEC and I said, you guys are already investigating my company for something different. Here's what I'm saying. And the guy at the SEC said, you know, we could put you in prison for sharing this type of information outside the company. And I was like, what? So then like a week later, I had to train like the banks and insurance companies that we were doing business with that had the software. We had to train them so that their people could blow the whistle federally. This is an official process that is mandated. It's in the documents, right, that they have for the law. This is how you blow the whistle. We had to train clients on how to do that. Well, ironically, I had to do that because I was left no other choice. And then I proved in court 3 years later that the day I blew the whistle, the VP of HR and the VP of legal for my company ordered my termination, which is, you're supposed to go to jail for that. They don't go to jail in reality. So all these whistleblower provisions and protections, I quickly found out were just an early warning system to the multi-billion-dollar people that hold the other end of those purse strings, and they cut risk. And so that's how I got into doing research and podcasting and filmmaking and conducting interviews and answering the questions that built up in the early 2000s for me.
Didn't you almost die on 9/11, or wasn't it some kind of twist of fate that kept you from being in a meeting?
There were several twists of fate.
Tell us.
All right. One was, it wasn't show up Wednesday, Thursday, Friday in the morning that week. It was show up Tuesday was the message I got on Monday. When I went to leave for that meeting, I'm not working. Like, I've been off work. I had been off work since June. So I was going to, my buddy had a beach house in Red Bank, and it was like his last week for rental. So I was supposed to meet some friends over there, and we're going to stay there the whole rest of the week. So I'm like in a independent skateboard t-shirt and like a beach shirt, and I got this file folder, and I'm driving down to the World Trade Center, and it's a beautiful morning. And before I could drive down there, I had to go from my apartment to the garage where I keep my cars. And I had a Range Rover and a Porsche. So I asked for the Rover because I was going to the beach for a week and I wanted to bring stuff with me. And he's like, it'll be a half hour before we can get it down. He's like, but your other car's down here in the lobby. It's like they park like certain cars down below and they store stuff up top. So I ended up taking the Porsche that morning and packing lighter. So that took me extra a couple minutes before I could actually get on the road to go down there and drop these files. And I thought I was just dropping them between two meetings. Like, they had a global conference call that started like, I don't know, 6:30 in the morning Eastern time. And they had the UK and Australia and all these executives around the world on this call. And those executives were in the 98th floor of Trade Center 1, the North Tower. So they had a meeting all morning, and then they had a break in the meeting. And I was supposed to go give some of these people in the meeting this blue folder. And in the blue folder was a whole bunch of millions of dollars of invoices from my company to the client company, Marsh & McLennan, that I wasn't being paid on. So my company is doing business with my client. In a way, I'm the executive account manager that brought the account to the company. So I was like, why are we being cut out of that? So I had raised those questions. I got fired the next day in June 2001 for raising those questions. And then finally, when I had gotten another job offer around the beginning of September, I was like, oh, I should get answers to those questions about, like, what are these millions of dollars and what's the project? And the people that were there that morning in those meetings, they had worked the IBM Lotus Notes project that we had migrated to put everything online, because what my company did was we sold web servers. So this was the beginning of the internet era, where huge insurance companies like AIG and Marsh & McLennan, they want to go from like these mainframe and, a little bit newer than that to like web technology and do transactions online and all this sort of stuff that really hadn't been done back then. And the people from the Lotus Notes world, they were all going to lose their jobs. So I thought if they could like use this as a card, maybe they could keep their jobs, right? There's like 30 or 40 of them that we worked with that we knew they were going to lose their jobs as soon as this thing flipped over. So yeah, if my car would have been ready sooner, I might have been down there earlier. But what I ended up seeing that morning was, as I was on West Side Highway going south toward the trade centers, the building was just smoking by the time I figured out something was going on. So I didn't see a plane, especially Flight 11, impacted. And I was in the flight path. If it had flown over, because it had just happened when I was down there. And I was there maybe, I don't know, what is it, 15, 18 minutes before the second building blew up. So my time down there is like 20 minutes total before I got out of Dodge. And yeah, there's a lot to it. And that's
people can go to your podcast to get a lot of the information too on what you think about 9/11.
Yeah, I got that for you. It looks like 9/11 Synchronicity is a podcast I did from 2006 to 2009. So that would have the evidence, all the stuff that's counter narrative to 9/11. And then after that, I did the Peace Revolution podcast for 10 years, which is the whole history of globalism, internationalism, how they subverted our school system. And it's got solutions in there too. So it's evergreen content for education. It's not like other podcasts.
Well, let's talk about that. Because I'll pull up University of Reason, and I mean, you have on your name there, Autonomy Navigator. And just so people know, you have this University of Reason where you can learn about autonomy. I want you to define the terms for us real fast. Like, what is the University of Reason? What do you mean by Autonomy Navigator?
All right. So the University of Reason is something I filmed back, or I started back in 2010, and it produced the ultimate history lesson with John Taylor Gatto, who was New York City's state and the city and state's #1 school teacher. And then he came out and said, here's why I'm successful, because I educate students. I don't school them and indoctrinate them. And he started writing books to discern the difference. So he resigned on the op-ed page of the Wall Street Journal. And so the University of Reason is what I had come up with while I was reading through his books, because the universities as we have them are not education centers. They're indoctrination centers. And in the 20th century, there's a lot of books. You can see the infiltration top down of, for instance, intelligence agencies and nation states with their agenda and propaganda trying to forcefully shape the American public away from our attitudes, values, behaviors, and beliefs that kept us independent from the former British Empire. So the University of Reason is a logical step forward. If this thing is needed and it doesn't exist, we should create it, and then it will popularize itself. A couple years later, we started adding courses to that curriculum and that university idea, because, you know, ideas are good, but you actually have to take action and precipitate a whole bunch of progress to make them happen. So what I saw was Gatto points out this gaping hole in our education system. We think we fill it with schooling, but schooling drops you off down here and the world's demands are up here. And we don't have a way to fill this gap. We need methods, and we need communication, and we need community, and we need tools and resources, and we need to know how to do these things a lot more quickly with dexterity. So Gatto he describes the problem. The ultimate history lesson is 5 hours of him describing, here's how they do all the things that you're seeing in the world. And it makes a lot more sense when you see the production line is purposefully disabling people and not enabling them with education. So that's the problem. Knowing the problem is necessary, but it is not the solution. So then I took my entrepreneur franchise experience that made me successful and helped me earn $1 million before I was 30 in the corporate world. And then I added a whole bunch of other skills that people need. And I created the autonomy course. And it just, you know, the notion is you can't help other people until you're strong enough to be self-reliant and disciplined and have integrity to yourself before you can actually help other people without actually preying on them. So
okay, give me an example of like
sure.
one asset of all of this. Like, because when I think of autonomy, like I'm thinking of here's how you grow squash, here's how you butcher a cow. Like that's
part of it.
Okay.
So
give me one asset and walk me through how the current model and what you're trying to do, like what the most of us are going around participating in without maybe realizing it, and how you're trying to flip that.
All right. So the current model,
the consequence would be if you didn't. Okay.
The current model is here's an authority at the front that tells everybody in the class how things are, and the answers are in the back of the book, and no one needs to ask a question. Like learning is asking a question and pursuing it mentally to find the answer and to understand. That's not the goal of schooling, right? So one thing we teach in autonomy is a simple 3-step method to learn anything. So if I wanted to learn butchering, here's how I would go about it. If I wanted to learn permaculture, here's how one goes about that, right? So it's one 3-step method that allows you to open any door to any piece of knowledge and get the experience you need So that, first of all, is very liberating. And then it makes it a lot harder for the propagandists to foist upon you unrealities and for you to accept them, which gets us back to like some of these other stories that we covered earlier. The goal with these stories is not to convince us, we the critical thinking people, that Russell Brand's a rapist. What they're doing is they're giving that to the people who don't need evidence to come to the conclusion and be staunch about it. That's their control group, and they gaslight them consistently. So we notice this is going on, but they're not trying to convince us with any of this stuff, because they're not going to. When they do this, they're not trying to fool the critical thinkers, whether it's Iran-Contra or BCCI or 9/11 or 2020 COVID. They're not trying to fool the critical thinkers. They're trying to give the people who are willing to be cowards and not use their critical thinking faculties the excuse not to have to, do any thinking about it. They'll just assume that what they've been told is true, and they will parrot it to other people. And the Romans had a word for this called psittacism, P-S-I-T-T-A-C-I-S-M, to parrot what authority says instead of using your thinking faculties. So in essence, here's how they control everybody. Stimulus, reaction. Reaction's predictable because you've been through schooling. Everyone's taught to react like the same to stimuli, right? That's part of their conditioning process. That is slavery. And that is the mind control that they use. Assumption without thinking, that's mind control, right? Now down here, you have stimulus, thinking, and then thoughtful response. And that's the essence of freedom, because we put our critical thinking, our curiosity, our inquiry, our ability to learn and understand before we take action. And that differentiates us. And they're not really trying to get us to turn that off, because they took it out of our system. There's no reinforcement out in our culture really for this type of critical modality of using a method to discern reality. So we start into this thinking that having thoughts is thinking. And then by the time you get to understanding what thinking and learning are, it's like, oh, those are the assumptions that are programmed in. That's the indoctrination. And if we don't question that, if we don't dig into it, if we don't scratch past it, we're never going to trigger our complexity and get into growth mode and actually come to an understanding that we have earned through learning. And that process has been mystified and occulted and kept away and hidden from Americans and people around the world. This whole process that we have undergone with the Prussian PhD system has been done to China. It's been done to the Middle East. This is a top-down agenda that's been rolling out for over 120 years. So does that answer your question?
Yes, it does. Okay. I want to ask about, I guess, when it comes to like big picture of what, say you could get, or I don't know how many people, like, because I was thinking, say you get the majority of people on Earth to think and work this way. I guess I don't know what the right word would be. Like think through topics or like their lives using your techniques. What's like the ultimate? Like what world would you like to see? Like how would that change the way that things are on Earth? Like is it war, or I mean, you know what I mean? Like what would be your big picture goal for using all of this or for getting more people on board?
First off, it's a selfish thing. It surrounds me with really competent people who do what they say they will do when they said they would do it, which is integrity, with an attitude of gratitude and a culture of excellence. So for me, that works really well. For them, it also works in their life, because the reason I'm teaching these skills is all the value that I've gotten in my life is not from schooling or anything they taught me on TV or in the corporate world. It was from learning to know thyself and learning to know your environment and keeping those in sync and knowing what your value is and how to build your value and how to make your offer to the market and how to negotiate that and how to do that enough times that you can stay in business. These are the mystical secrets that release people from the golden handcuffs of the paycheck. You need to know how to do both, just like you need to know how to use both feet to walk forward. Paycheck and being an entrepreneur should intertwine throughout your career, throughout your life, because you're going to need one or the other sometimes, depending on what your situation is. So you want to be conversant in both those. Most people only know how to make a resume and go try to find a job that's being offered by somebody else. They never learn how to be the person who's offering the job and signing the checks. And that can be easily demystified. And you used to be able to go down any main street in America, and here's all these businesses, usually run by families, that are doing the thing that they're not teaching in school anymore. Because entrepreneurism used to be an aspect of an education, and the literacy rate in this country used to be severely high, with a lot less propaganda to read through to the noise in order to find the signal. So If we can identify the noise, make a filter, keep it over here, study the signal, become upwardly mobile, be able to help ourselves. Like I went from podcasting for 10 years only on donations to becoming a parent and saying I have to up my value proposition to the market. And now because of that, I work in such like close proximity to the people that sign up, whereas podcast audience is like over the wall. You don't really have too much interaction. But now being able to share these skills, work with the students as they do the practice exercises to own these skills for themselves, it's like giving them the same opportunity that I afforded for myself in my early 20s. That was a long time ago, 30 years ago. And being able to escape this gravity, this swirling kind of whirlpool effect that as deflation goes and like makes our money worth less, and then the prices of everything are increasing, unless we're going to be increasing our offer and value to the market, we're going to be standing in a bread line, hoping to get bread and not bugs at some point. So I think there's a reason these things don't exist. There's a reason that Harvard and Yale won't teach you sales that's not based on the 7 deadly sins. Did you know that we can perform solutions? Like sales is problem solving. You don't need to use fear and ego and all these things like they do in marketing and advertising and sales. Like it's possible to do sales, and which is just problem solving, without pushing, persuading, convincing, or conniving. They don't want people to know that, because you know what? That's pretty palatable to most people. They're like, I could do that. And in many cases they already do, but they don't know it explicitly how they do what they do. Right. Yeah. So giving people the opportunity to get a real education. And the other question was like, if everyone did this, they're not going to. Like everybody needs what I offer, but only a few people are willing to go through the trouble 12 weeks a year to kind of go through and get the skills for themselves. So I try to keep the classes small and under 100 people per season, so I can remember everyone's names and we have real human interactions. And then we have a couple in real life events every year where we get to like, hug and share food.
That sounds fun. Okay, I want to throw some questions at you from AllisonMorrow.locals.com. Again, don't forget, everybody, go sign up, be on the editorial boards where we have all the fun. There were some questions put in a while ago, because originally we were supposed to do this podcast a couple of weeks ago. They're still evergreen, so they're good. But I want to go to the live chat because darn it, I have to pull it up. Well, let me throw the question
live.
at you.
That's good.
I know, I'm doing it live.
What do you got?
Do it live, like I said. Well,
do it live.
There's a chat going on about, like, I guess if I were to sum it up, it would be when stuff happens like what's happening with Russell Brand or like Donald Trump, something, the state goes after, the deep state goes after Donald Trump or whatever, that we just gloss over their dark sides, that they could have these dark sides, or they do have these dark sides. And we're just like, we just ignore that. And we make them martyrs for a cause. And I guess, I don't know, I want you to respond to it, but like for me personally, like, let's take Russell Brand specifically. I have no heroes. So I stand by what a pastor of mine said many years ago, which is there's no such thing as a good man. There is a good God in men. I'd see every single person as capable of doing all of the same things. And, I think God looks at the heart, and at the end of the day, we all need God's grace. I just don't see people as anything less than in need of God. So like, I don't overlook, bad behavior in the sense that like, I'm just like, oh, whatever. I hero worship this person. I'm going to follow them off a cliff, because I don't do that with people.
Yeah, that's dangerous.
Regardless of whether what you do is you talk nasty to the cashier at the grocery store or you sexually assault someone or whatever, you're not my hero, because I don't have one. I don't have a hero. I trust God plus no one. That's the way I look at it. So I just expect all humans to eventually fall. That said, I'm still interested in cases where, in this particular case with Russell Brand, not just the policy of like, okay, you have this guy who's been going along, basically untouched for a while, saying stuff that's would have gotten me taken off YouTube. I really believe that. I mean, I barely touched some of the stuff he's been able to talk about, and I got suspended multiple times.
Yep.
He's going along. He's fine. He's making millions of dollars. YouTube's making millions of dollars. And all of a sudden, anonymous allegations come out of nowhere. Why now? I mean, I think that's a fair question to ask. I also think it's a fair question to ask why YouTube didn't just kick him off altogether. Why didn't they just kick him off the platform? Why are they still making money off of him if they hate his guts so much? And then thirdly, I think it's fair to look at the fact that now it's not just YouTube. Now it's like, look at Rumble. Now let's look at where Russell Brand is. Let's look at Rumble. Let's look at who he's connected to. And now like people like me, we're now, getting swept up in it. And then of course, I think they, like the Times, London Times or Daily, whatever it's called, that did the original report on him, or like CNN or whatever, would they love to see like a clean sweep of Rumble? And like, yeah, I think they would. I mean, I think they would be, perfectly happy to use this as an example to, the rest of us that we're all just, we're on this crazy platform with a bunch of criminals or something. So I don't mean, that's my takeaway. I don't feel like I'm overlooking it, but, or like that doesn't matter. It's just, I mean, I guess at the end of the day, I think this is interesting, not because of who Russell Brand is or even like specific allegations against it, but the fact that he hasn't gone through any kind of criminal process yet. And like, he's, it could happen to anybody. I mean, it could happen to anybody. And why is YouTube still making money off of him? And what's going on? I mean, as somebody who covers censorship,
they're gangsters.
I think it's fair to ask. So what do you think about that? Do you think you're glossing over the sins or something of these people by saying, is he becoming a martyr, I guess, unfairly?
Well, let's analyze for a second.
Yeah.
Russell Brand has a dark and mysterious past, and that's well known. That's why he was popular in Hollywood, right? So like, he was up to some stuff. He wrote about it in his books. But if he was up to the level of stuff that they're accusing him of, he would have been blackmailed. He would have been on the Epstein list. He'd have been at Epstein's Island. He'd be flying Lolita Express, right? He's not. Those other people are in that milieu, right? So the fact that they couldn't get blackmail on him is very similar to like the persecution of Owen Schroyer. That he didn't break a law here. He didn't break a law here. They couldn't find anything on his phone. So let's get him for this other stuff over here and give him 60 days. So I just see unequal applications of the justice system. And it's like studying history. It's not unlike what they did at the beginning of the Soviet Union or with the revolution in Mao's China. And these were sponsored by Western robber baron type of people. So I think that's probably still in the mix of what's going on.
Yeah. Well, yeah, maybe so. Anyway, I think it's interesting because when you get into the alternative media world, which like I think rather new to, but I was in, the corporate world for a long time. There are very similar dynamics to the way content works, I think. I mean, I think it can be just as homogenous, I guess, and just kind of, I don't know, tribal as like the corporate, news world can be. And like anyone who dissents from even the dissenter, like you're not dissenting enough or you're too dissenting or, you know what I mean? Whatever it is, like, and everybody, like, I don't know. It's just interesting to watch how certain people are handled. And I think it is a fair question. Like, are there certain people who are untouchable because like we need them as our advocates or we need them as our leader of some kind, even, and so we're just going to overlook these other things. At the same time, I don't know, for me personally, I don't know. I've seen pictures of Trump with Epstein, I've never denied that.
Yeah. The Clintons went to his wedding. Rothschild Incorporated bailed out Trump in 1991. The Bloomberg article is called Donald's Trump Card. You can't find it on their site. Bless you. You have to go to Internet Archive to find that. But if you read to page 2, Wilbur Ross of Rothschild Inc. bailed Trump out, and they kept his name on the buildings because it was worth more money than he was actually worth in his bankruptcy. And then when Trump became president, he made Wilbur Ross the first commerce secretary, paid off that debt, and then put another commerce secretary in to pay off another debt. So that's why I don't think the person in the White House is like the conductor or executive of anything. There's a whole infrastructure that puts those people in place. And though they don't like Trump, like he's not that far from what they are.
I totally agree as somebody who knows very little that it seems very obvious, especially under Biden, that president is like some kind of puppet for somebody else, because I just
It's
like,
just
I
so
don't.
Obama can wear his sweatpants because
Yeah.
it's his third term. That's what he said, right?
Yeah, so Obama wears sweatpants. That's funny. Okay. Uh, Here we go. Critical thought. The obvious first up is the rehashing of the COVID lies. To what ends? Who wins? I already know that we the people lose. Why does the intelligence state that actually runs the government support this madness? Is it to implement social controls via digital identity numbers and dystopian social controls?
Yes, and hey, real quick, let me just show you this, and then I'll answer that next question.
Okay.
Not that one. Let's go this one. The Times of London is the one that's started this hit piece against Russell, right? So Lord Northcliffe was Viscount Northcliffe was in control of the Times, and he was part of the Cecil Rhodes Roundtable. He's part of the Anglo-German Fellowship, and it was also supported by the Astor family. So when you have a place that is this center of journalism that is wholly controlled by people who have made this same plan that led up to, you said COVID, right? So let me go for a second. I started building this map in 2008 because I was studying too much to remember. And then I found as I build the map, you're actually making synapses in your brain. So I remember a lot better. I organized my thoughts at one point. So this is the 2019-2021 coronavirus pandemic. And there's a lot of management to it. You know, there's a lot of influences and predecessors to this, right? So you've got the people who oversee it. You've got the people who ran the operations and exercises, right? So like, you know about Event 201 and these sort of things. Do you know about, DARPA's projects since 2012 where they invited Moderna? They're like, hey, be our front, because Moderna is mode RNA. And they've been like, this is their holy grail, this mRNA research that they've been doing over the past 25, 30 years. So DARPA licenses Moderna in 2013 for a gene therapy. Now, I was incredulous. I said, no way. So I went to the SEC filings, DARPA, so you type in SEC Moderna filings, find that document, do the worst search for gene therapy and gene therapies, and that's what their whole company's about. And there's even, I think it was one of the German health ministers who's like, if we wanted to get everyone to take mRNA experimental gene therapies, there would be a lot of pushback. But when we presented it as vaccines during the pandemic, everyone adopted it. So these are eugenicists, these are transhumanists, these are internationalists, and there's a finite number of people on this planet. And when you follow their activities multi-generationally, it's kind of handed down from one group of mentees and mentors to the next. So a good example of that would be Darwin's bulldog, Thomas Henry Huxley, had a son named Leonard, and then Leonard had sons like Aldous and Julian. So T.H. Huxley mentored H.G. Wells, who mentored Aldous Huxley, who mentored George Orwell. And so there's continuity on their side. They have an agenda. They know what it is. They state it to each other. They leave it for us to read. If we would only read the right things, we could have an understanding of what they're doing. And it's like the open conspiracy is what Wells called it. They're doing it out in front of people, but they'll distract us with bread and circus while that goes on.
Yeah, that is so crazy. Speaking of which, the food truck we had at our wedding was bread and circuses. All right. What schools did you attend, and what is your religious upbringing?
I was raised as a Presbyterian, which is a form of Protestantism. And then I discovered like Catholics had to kneel, and there's all these, like, you had to confess to a dude in a box in the back of the plate. There was a whole bunch of that stuff I discovered, like once I got into 8th grade and the schools started mixing in high school and stuff like that. I went to Penn State for 5 years, and that was not my first choice. But when I found out I had to pay for school myself, Ivy League was no longer the option.
I hope my kids are watching that one. All right.
I also attended as a junior the Westinghouse Science Honors Institute on weekends, and we would learn about advanced science, and like they would have us try to solve questions and answer stuff that they can't figure out. So it was like they're trying to intellectually harvest young high school students' brilliance, like Goodwill Hunting type stuff.
Did you grow up in Pennsylvania?
Yeah, Beaver, Pennsylvania.
Okay,
it's a little town on the Ohio. Ohio goes north from Pittsburgh, and then when it starts to go south, that's Beaver. It was the first. It used to be a fort during the Revolutionary War, And if you read up on it, it's the 1st Regiment for the United States Army was born there.
Oh, interesting. My family is from Pennsylvania. My dad got a job as an orthopedic surgeon in Florida when I was 3, so that's why we moved from basically. Well, I was born in Pittsburgh, and then we moved to Florida when I was 3. But most of my family's from the Philadelphia area, so I can hear the accent a little bit. Well, my mom is from Wilmington.
Well, I can speak Pittsburghese and Yinzer.
I hear a little bit. I do hear a little bit of the accent. Okay, final question. Kenny Eagle. Well, I'm glad he rescheduled. Oh, yeah, that's because we had to reschedule. To me, the question on everyone's mind is what happened in Lahaina and why? Was it just poor governance or actual malice by the powers that be? Is it just local or part of something global? Sorry, that was 3 questions.
That's okay. It's not accidental because they want you to believe it's the incompetence theory. Incompetence would mean people get fired for being incompetent. That doesn't happen in 9/11. It doesn't happen in COVID. It doesn't happen in Lahaina, right? So what do you have? You have a very wealthy piece of real estate that has locals and indigenous people who don't want to sell it to big corporations. Big corporations like BlackRock that came out of Steven Schwartzman's Blackstone. So Skull and Bones company created BlackRock, which is one of the world's, if not the world's biggest public company. And so when BlackRock owns Hawaiian Electric, and they're trying to, do ESG and diversity and all this other stuff, they're not maintaining the wires. So it creates a system where, oh, look, the company is trying to save money, so they didn't do maintenance. So there's all this plausible denial. Now they've created a situation where a terrible fire can go off. Now, how do they contain it? How would they maximize if that happened? God forbid. Because they do have discussions like this. And I'll answer that question. What discussions, right? But in the Lahaina situation, so they've created a situation that they could have this horrible accident and this fire, the trees aren't trimmed, the wind kicks up, it knocks down a wire, everything burns down. So now that plausible denial situation is created with Hawaiian Electric and the lack of maintenance and the grasses that they planted after the sugarcane fields that are super flammable, they've created like a ticking time bomb. But the globalists don't want it to go off randomly. They would lose their opportunity to maximize on it. So maybe they have somebody set it off. Maybe it's arson. Maybe it's a little of both. Maybe they just use that situation. Hey, there's a small fire over there and they can make a big fire. I don't know about the space lasers and directed energy weapons, though those things do exist. And they do demonstrate various capacities and elements that you might be able to match up to a crime scene. Some people have said they were used at 9/11 because of the strangely burnt cars and the things that were done that were kind of like, how did the Arab hijackers with box cutters do that type of stuff, right? So I don't jump to conclusions, but I do say, well, there's a claim. Is there any merit to it? Directed energy weapon is a large budget of the Department of Energy. They do have these things. Would they not use it? I don't know. I'm not saying they did. I'm just learning about the world we inhabit and what they've done with our tax dollars while we weren't looking. So now you come back to Lahaina, you could have a fire on schedule with a predetermined, here, we're going to come in and rebuild it plan, just like you had on 9/11. And the people lose. And you could tell that by the censorship, the black fences, the no drones, the no answers, the lying about the thousands of people, the fact that they blockaded those cars and people burned with their families in those cars, the fact that they turned off the water, the fact that they didn't use the sirens. These are not points of incompetence. These are points of collaboration. And dare I say, that's conspiracy evidence right there. And only people with a critical faculty can do anything with that other than say conspiracy theory. So now,
okay,
how do they know? Real quick. World War I, there was discussions, and I have the first editions of their private papers. This is how I read and learned this. But you can also see it in James Corbett's World War I Conspiracy, because we have the books in there as well. Lord Grey on the British side, Colonel House on the American side are having a discussion about how to get America into the war. The question is posed, what if the Lusitania were to be sunk? And the answer comes back, well, then America would surely get into the war. And this conversation goes on with the King of England, right? So this is like top of the top discussing like, hey, what's going on? And a couple hours later, the Lusitania is sunk by the Germans, and now the Americans have to get into the war. And that plus the Balfour Declaration has like set up a whole American history that people don't know about. but select authors over time, like Anthony Sutton and Carol Quigley and Porter Sargent, have written about copiously. So part of what I do is like read that stuff and convey it out to the people who need that so they can make life-giving decisions in their own time.
Richard, I really appreciate your taking the time. I know I told you before we would be done in less than an hour. It's 59 minutes and 26 seconds.
Well played. Well played.
So before, I want you to just give everybody where they can find you, just give whatever pitches, but just real fast to everybody, in a month, I am heading to the Weston A. Price Foundation's Wise Traditions Conference. It's like the radical foodie conference of all conferences. It's in Kansas City, Missouri. Green Pasture, one of my sponsors, where I get my vitamin D cod liver oil, is going to pay for the hotel and everything. They just told me I have to get there. Here's the deal. If we raise enough money, we're going to bring the whole team, the 2 producers, 3-year-old and 1-year-old, plus Lynn, the technical director, and put on a much better show. If it's just me, that's okay too. We're still going to get great content out of there. But I did put it out there as a Give, Send, Go. If you're interested in participating in that, it's givesendgo.com/Allison 2 Wise Tradition. So that's a link in the description as well, along with links for all of my other sponsors too. Again, givesendgo.com/Allison 2 Wise Traditions. People like Naomi Wolf, Catherine Austin Fitz, Dr. Tom Cowan. Lots of people are going to be there. So it should be an interesting time, and I'm really excited. Okay, Richard, where can people find you?
My podcast is grandtheftworld.com, and it goes on Sunday nights from 9 p.m. till 4 a.m. live. And then most people catch the replay during the week. And my other project is called Autonomy. It's a 12-week training course twice a year with lifetime enrollment. So if people go through once, they can go through all the future courses and all the past courses, the versions of it. But it helps you get entrepreneur skills, leadership skills, executive skills, things that you need to raise your standard of living to keep up with the modern times. And then learning such techniques and tactics and strategies and principles helps you keep buying wine and funding the trips that Allison wants to take, the Weston Price. Yeah. Those people have the best teeth, right? Because they all know what Weston Price was all about. Good food in your body makes healthy body. I know it's rocket science, isn't it?
I know. Well, that's what I keep telling myself too with this garden, because it started out as like, we're going to save money on food and have good nutrition. And at this point, we've spent so much money putting this garden together that I'm like, we'll just make it about nutrition because it's not about saving food. I think you could probably save some food by just like going to the grocery store and just buying cheap stuff. But you're right.
That's not really food though.
It's not food. It's true. Yeah. And yeah, we want to pick stuff right out of the ground. It definitely is most nutritious. Eventually we'll figure out how to grow it. And it's funny, last quick thing. We were at a farm store yesterday, my daughter and I, she's 3, going on 15. And she told the farm store owner who I was talking to, because he has a garden too, that Daddy's going to shoot that squirrel. That's what she told him, because we were telling him about how this squirrel that keeps eating my garden. And she's like, Daddy's going to shoot that squirrel. So anyway. All right, Richard, thanks everybody for watching. We'll see you next time.